Kriga Bundalo. Before I start this video, I'm going to ask a question, and this is a serious one. I want you guys to step back there and be honest with yourselves now. Be honest with you, be honest with me, okay? How many of you have actually read this particular Robert E. Howard story? Okay, no judgment. Not everybody's expected to read every single Robert E. Howard story here. In fact, if you're watching these videos, I'm pretty much assuming you haven't actually read them yet. Maybe you're going to read them later, or maybe you're just watching this video as a refresher and you read it a long time ago. But how many of you have actually read this one? I gotta say, I reread this week, and this was a weird one, and it made me sort of step back. It made me sort of go, what is it that's leaving this odd taste in my mouth when I'm done this story? What? Literally what? This is the question I'm asking myself, because I finished this one, and I put it down, I closed the book, and I said, what's so different here? And it occurred to me after the fact. I had to take a couple days to think about this one. This one's written differently. And it's written differently because I think Robert E. Howard wanted to do one thing and then built a whole story around that one thing. Now, I'm not going to spoil this, all right? If you want to know what I think that one thing is, stick around to the very end and we'll talk about that. But on the way there, let's do our typical Robert E. Howard Battle Royale thing, where we walk through the original Robert E. Howard story, and we'll walk through what happened in it, and who the dramatis personae were, and what the setting was, and what the outcome was. And then we'll compare and contrast two different comic adaptations. Now, I'll tell you, the book that we're covering this week is coming out of this, and it is A Witch Shall Be Born. And the two different comic adaptations we're doing are in Savage Sword of Conan #5, okay, which is an original Marvel magazine. And then I believe it was in Conan the Avenger in the 20s. We'll get into the exact numbers when I actually break the issue up. So we're basically comparing Dark Horse Comics and a Marvel magazine on this one to see which one is actually closer. Now, without any further ado, I'm going to throw in the spoiler alert now, okay? Because you know it's coming, you know it's going to be here. If you don't want to know what happens in this Robert E. Howard story, stop watching the video now. If you don't want to see the comics that actually walk through this original Robert E. Howard story, well, you also want to stop watching the video now, because those are the things we're going to be talking about. If you want to jump through, remember, I have chapterized this entire video. Chapterized, I think, is a word I just made up, but I'm going with it. We're chapterizing the video so you can click through and say, well, Tennessee Fats, what's the Robert E. Howard story? Well, maybe I don't want to see what the Robert E. Howard story is in your opinion, Tennessee Fats. I just want to see what the Dark Horse version is. Well, feel free to jump on through. And if you want, jump on through to the conclusion if you want to miss all this wonderful old man rambling along the way. Because we take a meandering path, as you guys know. Without any further ado, let's get into the books. All right, let's get into the Robert E. Howard version of this one. And we're going to make this quick because effectively this story was really quick. We just need to really pay attention to one piece, which is kind of in the middle. Actually, it's a little bit before the middle. But we'll get to that and we'll put the details in there in a second. So where does the story take place? Let's start with that. Well, the story takes place right here in Coran. Coran, smack dab in the middle of a Hyborian age. Now, there's a reason why it's important it's in Coran. That's because you have this big desert right beside it. On the other side of that, you have Turan. So, for any of you who are Conanophiles, you know that Kosakai run around this whole area here, raiding Turan and all sorts of things, because they're trying to basically get rich. So, you know that. So, bear that in mind, okay? The story starts off with Tamaris, using post-it notes here, because I like them. Tamaris is the queen of Coran, which is why I just put her there, okay? And what happens is she wakes up in her bedchamber to find that she's not alone, and Salome is there with her. Now, Salome, actually probably put that cursor over to here. There's a reason why that's there. Salome is with her, and Salome is not happy. And what we find out through the dialogue is that Salome is actually Tamaris' sister, twin sister, that has lived her whole life here in Cathay. Now, it's interesting. Howard actually went back to a really old narrative and an interesting plot to stick this in here. And what he did was he went back all the way, well, if I was this, well, I guess the earliest one that I know of this is probably Oedipus Rex. That was what, Sophocles? Sophocles was 494 to 404 BC. So you're going back 2,400 years here. Forget what happened at the end of Oedipus Rex, okay? Forget all that noise. The whole beginning of Oedipus Rex, which, and this is actually pretty common in a bunch of other Greek tragedies now that I think about it, is that there's a prophecy and that the birth of this child is going to lead to somebody dying or something bad, and as a result, we have to kill the child at birth. Okay, bear that in mind. That's effectively what happened to poor Salome. She was born with a crescent moon birthmark on her chest, and to the people of Coran, that means she's going to be a witch. Now, legitimately, she is going to be a witch. It wasn't just a prophecy, it's actually true. Apparently, one of their ancestors a long time ago shagged a demon, and as a result, every once in a while, 100 years, a witch shall be born. Not all of them are killed. Some of them grow to full age and have a good life. Well, I wouldn't say good, but they enjoy themselves. But most of them are killed at birth. Interesting part here is Salome has been kicked out of Cathay. The sorcerer who rescued her when she was abandoned as a child here in the desert took her all the way back here to Cathay and said, I'm going to teach you everything you need to know about sorcery. But then after she grew into womanhood, said, you know what? You just can't learn jack. You wizards from the West are pretty crappy, and witches as well are pretty crappy, and you just don't have the level I've got. You don't have my level of game, so you know what? Go home. Well, this has made Salome fairly angry. So Salome comes back, and instead of, having a conversation with Tamaris, she's got some real issues here. She's angry, like really mad. And she says, instead of having a conversation, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring a whole Shemitish army of mercenaries, which are led by this guy, Constantius. And what they're going to do is they're going to come in with this elaborate scheme I have, where they're going to be traveling through town, and it doesn't matter why and how they make it happen. The bottom line is she's going to use this army of mercenaries to take over, stick Tamaris in a jail cell, and effectively rule the country as Tamaris because she's Tamaris' twin sister. But guess what? It works. The whole thing works perfectly. Goes off without a hitch, except for Conan. And this is where things get a little screwed. So we're going to bring Conan in here because you know what? He's got a big piece in this. So he's now on the dramatis personae board. They're having a conversation with all the army because they call all the army together. Because bear in mind, Tamaris, at this point in time, I'm going to put this down here to represent the fact she's in the dungeon. She's in the dungeon. There's reference to the fact that she was actually ravaged on the way to the dungeon, which that's harsh for Howard. We haven't seen that sort of language, or at least not that harshly for Howard yet. Anyway, she's in the dungeon. Salome and Constantius, whoever, are talking, and they're saying to the army that is gathered in front of them without armor and without arms, that's not arms as in weapons, says they're not armed for a loft boy. That's a DC character. Jesus. Anyway, says to them, you know what, guys have been great. You've done a fantastic job, but because Constantius here has 10,000 Shemitish soldiers, you're not needed anymore. So everybody just, go home. Thanks for your service. And Conan says, oh, nobody's going anywhere. No. Storms on up to Salome, pretending she's Tamaris, looks at her for a second, does one of these cockeyed sort of looks like, just staring at her in utter silence, and then just turns to everybody and says, nah, that's not Tamaris, that's somebody else. Nobody's going home. This is somebody impersonating your queen. You should probably solve this problem. Well, this leads to just a debacle. It's a massacre. The Shemitish soldiers who are fully armed basically attack the unarmed Kozakian army, Koranian army, just basically attacks the living crap out of them, leaving very few of them alive, and captures Conan. And this is where we go to a cutscene to our next one, where we get this guy. Valerius is wounded. He's one of the Koranian army, and he's explaining to his girlfriend, Ivga, who's also a nurse, by the way, hey, this is what happened, and basically gives the story of that slaughter. Because we don't have the narrative of that particular chapter in the first chapter. It's unfortunately spoken to after the fact in the beginning of book 2. And he says, this is what happened. Conan, unfortunately, was taken down, and they insisted that he be taken alive because Constantius wanted him alive. And then cutscene, Conan is out basically in the desert, right at the edge of it. Within the sight of the walls of Koran, the capital of Koran, is within sight of the walls. They have crucified him. And I think this is really the piece where Howard wanted to write this story. I believe what happened here was Robert E. Howard wanted to write a story about Conan being crucified. And he wanted to write a story about the mental anguish that Conan goes through while he's crucified and his own resignation to death once he realizes that he ain't getting out of this. Now, I don't know what sort of hot water Howard got himself in for doing this at the time, but clearly it must have been something, okay? Because he had to write a whole story around this just to get this one vignette out. And you can tell that this was the one that he wanted to put the most into because he literally put the most into it. When you read the story, this particular chapter is the longest part. The whole description of Conan and going through what he did is there in detail. The rest is sort of skimmed. Any of you who watched Conan the Barbarian, the movie, he was nailed to that tree. It was a tree he was nailed to? It was a tree he was nailed to. And basically in that scene, Schwarzenegger's up there and he bites the vulture, right? Kills the vulture, and the vulture drops dead. And that is effectively taken almost word for word for the experience that Conan goes through in this story. Because in this, Conan is crucified. He does try to get it. He actually tries to pull the nails through his hand. at one point in time. It discovers that the heads are too big. By the way, any of you are history buffs, there's still an actual active argument on this as to whether when they were crucifying somebody, they would nail them through the wrist or through the hand. It's funny that people still argue about this. I personally would never want to know. I hope that I am never experiencing crucifixion and actually find out how that goes. Ugh, not a positive thing to think about. I'm glad I live in the time that I'm in. Anyways, Conan is crucified. He's left there. Now, he's left there and he goes through this whole mental anguish, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Probably when we get to the conclusion, we'll chat a little bit about that whole mental anguish thing. And while he's there, suddenly rides up Olgerd. And I put this here in the middle of the desert for a reason, because Olgerd is there with 3 of his Kozakai, and he's looking at this guy, at Conan up there, and he's going, I should know this guy. And then the two of them chat. And long story short, they cut him down. And again, there's lots of dialogue about the cutting down, about the taking out of the spikes, all that sort of stuff, but listen, it's all gory details we can skip here. Bottom line is, it happens, and Conan rides off with Olgerd to become part of the Kozakai. Then we have the cutscene to the next one, and I should put this here. Okay, that's over in the media for a reason. This is an interesting one. I haven't seen this done by Howard yet, at least not that I can remember. Yeah, this is a weird one, because the actual part that happens here is effectively a Rocky montage, which is kind of cool. Effectively, what Howard does is he writes a letter between Astrius, who's in Coran, and his buddy Alcimedes, who's in Numidia. That's why I put that there, by the way. And he's telling what happened in the last 7 months. They're talking about how the city has basically been destroyed by Tamaris and how she's gone nuts. Like, we're going like mind-blowingly nuts here. And she's worshiping weird gods, and she's human sacrifices, and one day 10 people were led into a temple, and she's created some sort of monster living in the temple that she's slaughtering people to. She came out the next day with a crazy look in her eyes, and none of the people she led him through are ever seen again. And basically talking about the taxation, and it gives a little bit of background. What it actually does is it does a good job of telling the history of Coran and Shem and where they separated. Also talks a fair amount about the desert people that are here, and gives the details about the Cossacks and why the Cossacks, unfortunately, would never be able to mount an assault on Coran to actually solve the problem. It's interesting because really what Howard's doing here is he's setting up the end. He's setting up the story of where it will end. That's effectively that chapter. It was an interesting one because I don't remember seeing him do that before, which was kind of odd. Anyways, it's in the same chapter though. You actually end up having Salome visit Tamaris down in the jail, where she points out that, oh, by the way, you remember this guy that you like? Yeah, I cut his head off. Here's his head. Just to start to do mental anguish. And the reason why he included that, I believe, was to show that Tamaris has really been physically tortured to the limit of what she can be physically tortured to, which is why they're now resorting to mental anguish. To, again, express that time has gone by. 7 months has gone by. Well, in 7 months, what's happened to Conan? Well, I'll tell you what's happened to Conan. The next chapter of the story. Conan, over here, decides to say to Olgerd, hey, you know what? This has all been fantastic. And I've been doing a great job raiding for you, because Olgerd is doing the whole thing about bragging about how fantastic he is as a leader. And Conan's like, well, you know, actually, the reason why your ranks have swelled as much as they have is because I'm here. And these people are actually following me. You're giving the orders, but they're actually fighting for me. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to go back and I'm going to raid Coran. I don't want to raid anything else in Turan like you're telling me to, and I'm taking over. And Olgerd's like, what the freak? And he explains, like, he's the guy who runs this thing because, you know, these people don't trust their own people to be their leaders. They look to outsiders. And he's much stronger than Conan. And Conan's like, no. I'm actually stronger than you. And everybody here knows it. There's no room for 2 chiefs amongst the Kozakai. And he grabs his arm. And he breaks his arm. And there's dialogue back and forth, which basically mirrors what Olgerd said to him when he cut him off the cross. And he goes through that crucible of pain. And Conan lets him live and lets him ride off into the desert. And that chapter ends with Conan basically walking out to everybody who's a soldier and explains, guys, I got to tell you a story. Here's where the big battle comes in. And the battle is ridiculously quick. Effectively what happened here. Here's what happens. Okay, so Olgerd's gone, okay? Out of the way. Oh, by the way, Valerius, during this point in time, because this is kind of important, Valerius, while Salome was down torturing Tamaris the last time, has been disguising himself as a deaf beggar on the street, and has found news that Tamaris is actually alive. So we'll put her back up here. His plan is, while there's a battle going on outside, because they've heard that Conan is actually raising a siege to go and attack Coran, is that he's going to break in and steal Tamaris, and then they're either going to sue for peace with Conan if he wins, or they're going to flee if Constantinius wins. Good guy. I like this guy. This guy's got a lot of moxie. I like it. Anyways, the battle happens over here. Conan over here. Constantinius over here. Get on there, you. They have quite the fight, and effectively Constantius is drawn out because Conan has faked the fact that he has siege weapons, which he did not. He built sort of artificial things that sort of tricked him into thinking that Conan would be able to siege Corinth, which is why Constantius was drawn out to an actual battle. Again, Constantius with fully armed soldiers thought, okay, well, we're just going to rain pepper arrows on them from a distance and they'll be dead. This shouldn't be that big of an issue. What they don't know is that 3,000 Coranian former army members have fled and have been living at a oasis over here, waiting for Conan to say, hey, come and attack. Well, guess what? He told them to come and attack. So basically the entire army of these 10,000 mercenaries from Shem is decimated. There are very few people left. While this is happening, though, where are we here? Valerius has broken into the actual dungeon, has killed the dungeon master. See what I did there? Not a jailkeeper, a dungeon master. And has broken out Tamaris, and he's carrying her out. And unfortunately, Salome knows that Constantius is lost, knows that Conan is just going to have her slaughtered, and says, well, I'm going to sacrifice Tamaris to my monster. And I'm not bringing up the monster's name yet. We'll bring him up in a minute. And she's down here in the dungeon as well. Well, she discovers that Valerius and Tamaris are heading out and basically blinds them with a flash grenade, we'll call it that. Stabs the crap out of 3 of them. So all that's left is Valerius because they just bashed him on the head. Unfortunately, the blow wasn't a killing one, and then they carry off Tamaris. Valerius is finally getting his vision back, and Ivga appears out of nowhere. Don't know why she's there. And says, oh yeah, I saw them leaving, they're going to the temple. And he's like, holy crap, Salome is going to sacrifice Tamaris to her monster that she's got in the temple. And this is the point in time when we bring out the big word here, Thaug. Thaug is the name of the monster that Salome has put into the temple through sacrificing those 10 people who have never seen it again. And we'll get to Thaug in a second because he's kind of important. So anyways, this whole thing happens here where Valerius actually catches up with Salome, who's dragging Tamaris into Valerius. Catches up with Salome, who's dragging Tamarius, it doesn't matter, into the temple, and a battle ensues. Kills the actual retainer that's working with Salome, and actually kills Salome. That's right, you heard me correctly. Valerius is actually the one that stabs Salome through the chest. It's not Conan. Conan's not in the scene. Conan's still out here having the battle. He's not in town, right? So you're thinking, whoa, that was fairly major. Picks up Tamaris, carries her outside where Ivga has brought together a crowd of the locals to show that this is the actual queen. And just as they're doing this, a couple of Constantius's members that have remained in town come riding up, and they're peppering him with arrows. They're trying to kill him. And of course, the real Salome, which was stabbed through the chest that everybody thinks should be dead, comes wandering out and dripping blood, and everybody's sort of mortified by this. And this gives Valerius and Tamaris enough time where they think they're going to run into the temple to protect themselves from the arrows. And they turn around, and there's Thaug. Thaug is coming out because Salome has called him just before she died. Thaug is not happy. Thaug is quite the monster. Effectively, all he's described as is a mess of blackness where you see eyes and fangs and claws. Claws is referenced once, but the eyes and the fangs are referenced twice. It's a weird one. Thaug is coming up, but not a real description. And this is where Conan finally comes in. His army rides in just as Valerius and Tamaris are coming out of the temple. And Conan just tells 50 of his Kozakai, pepper that thing with arrows. And they do, wave after wave after wave from a distance. And Thaug drops dead. End of story. Really quick wrap up though, because Tamaris then turns around and says, okay, I'm going to rebuild my city. Conan, you're going to be my chief counselor. And Conan's like, no, I'm done with your city. I'm leader of that. I'm the hetman of the Kozakai right now. I'm going to go and, raid all sorts of places in Tehran. What you need is Valerius here to help run your country. And that's effectively where the story ends. It was really anticlimactic. It really was. It was an odd one because and Thaug is weird because Thaug is the exact same name when you pronounce it as Thaug, who was the monster in Slithering Shadow. So I don't know, that was kind of odd. But the majority of the story actually doesn't involve Conan. Really, the part that does involve Conan is a narrative of his battle where he's taken down, an incredibly detailed narrative of his crucifixion and release, and that crucible of pain that he went through. And then dialogue between him and Olgerd when he's taking over the actual Kozakai. But then at the end, he just sort of swoops in almost like Admiral Akbar in Star Wars, which is, yep, it's trap, and then everything, and that's the end of the interaction. Arrows fly, and he walks away. Really an odd one. And because it was so off on Conan content, this is what leads to the comic content that we're going to go through now, where they're purposely trying to fill in the Conan content. You'll see what I mean in a second. Let's get into the next book. All right, let's get into the story here now. This was an interesting one because I was actually going through my collection, trying to find my copy of Savage Sword #5, and I couldn't find it anywhere, which is weird. I don't know what happened to that thing. So we're going to go through the actual trade paperback here, Savage Sword of Conan Volume #1, which actually includes all the Savage Tales. And this is what we're going to be reading today. So to give you guys a sense, this is what your cover looks like. It's a classic Boris cover, which is really awesome. And I remember seeing this in my collection. That's why I'm sitting here thinking, why don't I have this anymore? Weird. Anyway, story by Roy Thomas. The interior is John Buscema. Now, you guys know what I think of John Buscema art. You know I'm happy with it, and you know I really like it. So this is going to be an interesting one. And Roy Thomas, we know for a fact, knows Conan really, really well. This is going to be a fun one for him, though, because really a lot of this story focuses on non-Conan. So I'm expecting, before we go through this one, that you're going to see Roy have to do a bunch of backfill, basically, to fill the story. Okay, so let's start it off here. Nice splash page. And here you have Tamaris waking up, and obviously in this one, she's waking up from a nightmare. She didn't just wake up from a calm sleep, she's waking up from a nightmare. She finds that a candelabra is out, and Salome appears, and there she is. Salome appears and tells the story. See, I am Salome. Tells the story of how she was dragged out of the desert and left for dead, but she was, rescued and raised elsewhere, and came back and was as scorned after she couldn't learn enough, and there's the crescent mark on her chest. And basically walks through the fact that she's come back, and then she says, she's like, oh, well, we can rule the place together. I'm glad to have you back. She's like, no. Before you go ahead and try to put me in my place, let's have a conversation here. Who's the army outside? Which is just like the dialogue that happens in the story. And basically Constantinius comes in, and they have the whole chat where Constantinius is going to help her take over and rule the country. And this is all part of a plot. And again, it's referenced here, and this is right to the story, where Constantinius is like, you're not going to deny me my muse before you put her in the dungeon, right? And she's like, no, tame the scornful hussy, if you will. And then there's screaming when she leaves. Really a full-on picture here of, okay, there is some ravaging going on, which is even harsh for Savage Sword of Conan to have included at the time. Anyways, you then do the cut scene where you have the next chapter. Remember I mentioned this is in vignettes. Well, here you have a character who's in pain. He's not doing well, and he's with his girlfriend. And in here, though, he's called Markios. I don't understand this, because this character has been introduced and basically tells the story of what happened previously. Here's Conan walking up, when the army is being dismissed, and says, no. This isn't your queen. This is some devil in disguise, which actually precipitates the whole battle, exactly as Valerius described it in the Robert E. Howard story. And of course, he's ranting and raving, going through mental anguish, and Ivga's trying to make him feel better. And of course, cutscene now to the big part, which is the Tree of Death. This is very good. The only thing that's kind of weird in this is the Robert E. Howard story is very clear that it is a traditional cross with a crossbeam. In this, it's more of an X-shaped thing. Now, granted, I don't know enough about crucifixion. Maybe this is more historically accurate, but Robert E. Howard was clear. This was a traditional crucifix with a crossbeam. That's not a crossbeam. These are not crossbeams. So, anyway, little odd, leaves Conan, and then you have pages of the suffering. And when he runs into, of course, the Kozakai, and when they cut him down, the crucible of pain that he has to go through until he finally gets out of there. And here you have the letter. And the letter's talking about, okay, this is what's happened in the 7 months. Again, he's writing to his buddy in the media, talking about the debauchery that's happening in town, and how Salome is, well, what they call is Tamaris, because they don't know it, Salome is completely nuts, and how the soldiers are ravaging women throughout the town, and how the men of proper military age are being sold off into slavery or are fleeing into the desert, and how they're being overtaxed, and how they've barely made it. But Conan, apparently, who was nailed to the cross, has somehow made it and is now running with the Kozakai. Reference is made to that, which is the exact same as in the Robert E. Howard story. But there is discussion of, again, Tamaris with these evil idols, and how they've gone off into basically the underground, and how Markios is the name of the person instead of Valerius here. And Markios thinks and has talked to him and said, oh yeah, this is a devil in the queen's guise. This is not actually them. Little different. Again, Markios, not quite sure why we have that, but again, he's disappeared because we don't know if he was captured by Constantinius's spies. Next scene that we're cut into here, where you have Salome basically punishing and torturing Tamaris with, again, the head of that person who she was so close to. And this is a weird one, though. When she leaves her, she goes outside,
and runs in, and this actual dialogue is very close to what happens in the story here. But it's an odd one, though, because this person who's a giant, that's a member of the actual mercenary army, is aware that Tamaris is in the basement and in the dungeon. And this is kind of odd because it was supposed to be that nobody was supposed to know, but he knows somehow. And Salome, this shows actually a little bit of vindictiveness that Marvel included, which was very clear that this individual would also have his turn with her as well before she dies. And the reference here is, oh no, you're forgetting. I've already had my turn with her weeks ago, many times. And you're like, oh, that is dark. That, again, even for Savage Sword or Conan, that is dark. But this dialogue is happening in public. They throw the head to the deaf beggar and give him hand signs to throw it away. But again, this guy now is sitting here, oh, no, I knew he was alive, or she is alive, and she's in the dungeon, and I'm going to save her. Okay, works for us, no problem. Cut scene now to where we have dancing girls, and Conan and Olveg having their chat. This is exactly as you would have expected it to have gone. The chat ends with Conan saying, I've already got my 3,000 guys, we're going to attack, we're done with you. He does attack a little more, but does break the hand and sends him off. Bang on, exactly as it would have been. And then we get back to, of course, where we would have had Valerius having this chat, but we don't. We have this Markios guy, or whatever his name is, having it saying, okay, we have to rescue her from the dungeon, and here's what we're going to do. We're going to either treat for peace with Conan, or basically we're going to escape. And Constantinius is talking to Salome. Bottom line is this all matches, okay? You don't need to know more about this. And here's the betrayal where, unfortunately, the army is wiped out because the actual cross group of 3,000 horsemen come riding in and basically slaughter the army. Now, this is kind of weird. This one here, though, is, again, where the dialogue changes a little. Just as she discovers that Constantinius and his army are done, she says, well, we're going to flee, but, before we do, we're going to make sure that Thog has one last feast. Well, in the already her story, there was no mention to fleeing. She had no intentions of fleeing. I think she was resigned to death. And she heads down to the dungeon and finds that it's not actually Valerius that's rescued her, but it's Conan. Conan somehow is back in town. He left the battle, and he's there in the dungeons rescuing the queen and carrying her out. And then there's the flashbang where, unfortunately, everybody's blinded, everybody's killed. And Conan gets his vision back and hears Tamaris being dragged off into the temple where she's going to be sacrificed. And Conan kills the retainer and then turns around. And this is interesting. Here, it's not Conan that's going to kill Salome. It's this guy who dives out of the window and does end up stabbing her through and through. And this, again, is Markios, which makes no sense because who is this character? And why was Conan there? It seems rather strange. Anyways, Conan goes outside and just approaches the crowd and says, this is the real queen. And here's Salome walking out, calling for Thog. And answers of arrows. Yep, that is the actual arrows of Constantinius's men who are firing. And there's a revolt. And he goes to run back in. And there is Thog, who has made his way out. Again, back and forth. Markios now is taking the queen. And Conan pulls out a sword and attacks Thog. And fights and blinds him here. And it is then that his dead raiders come in, and they pepper it with arrows, and it dies. At the end of the story, he says, okay, well, you know what? I appreciate this, and I'm going to make you my counselor. And he's like, nope, we're not going to do any of that. You've already got a good leader right here in Markios. Everything's fantastic, and I'm going to go and crucify Constantinius, and that's the end of the story. Interesting departures there, really interesting ones, and there were strange ones. Like, why would they really push that whole point of the ravaging of Tamaris in this one? I don't understand that. The battle being so bang on, but at the same time, you have Conan leave the battle in the middle of it to personally go and rescue Tamaris when he had no idea that Tamaris was even still alive at this point in time. Somehow Markios, instead of Valerius, has rescued her, or at least got information to him. Strange departures, but I can see what happened here. Obviously, you have to fill the pages with Conan content. This is a Conan magazine. It's not a Valerius magazine. So maybe that's why Roy filled it out that way? Odd. All right, let's get into the Dark Horse version now. All right, let's get into the Dark Horse version here. So as you guys know, I have a terrible time finding the actual individual issues of the Dark Horse books. I don't know what's going on. So we're going with another epic collection on this one. This is the one that's got the actual A Witch Shall Be Born story in it. It's nice, actually, a reproduction. I do like the way that these epic collections were put out because they really do have a high gloss quality. It's nice. I'm going to leave that at that. So when Dark Horse put this out, they put it out in 6 issues. which to me, when I started reading, seemed odd. I couldn't really figure out why you would go 6 issues on a story that was really so short as far as Conan content goes, but they did. Anyways, you're going to find this one actually and I'm going to, spoiler alert right now, this very closely matches the actual Robert E. Howard version. The dialogue is the same. Salome comes in out of nowhere. Obviously, this is a Dark Horse issue without the Comics Code Authority. Well, Established Sword of Conan also didn't have Comics Code Authority. So you're going to get a fair amount of the more sexy content in this one. I believe there's one scene in here, and a warning for the younger viewers out there, there is one in here where you do have boobs, all right? There's boobage in this. I can't do much about it. It's in the book, okay? But the story very much matches. They fill in and do little vignettes along the way that are different. I think what I'm going to do on this is just draw out the vignettes that I saw. So, for example, at the beginning, when Salome first meets Tamaris, she mentions that she's sent the guards away to a different wing. But in this, she says, I've sent them out of the wing of the palace, but they're dead. It's kind of weird. She stops and has a drink. It's kind of weird. She didn't do that in this story. Anyways, and of course there's the boobage I mentioned. The whole backstory, that all makes sense. There's inference here that maybe she has some sort of a sexual relationship with this sorcerer that was in Kitai. I'm not entirely sure if that's what they were inferring or not. Maybe that's what they're trying to use as the vehicle to explain why she's so off when she comes back. And I mean off in the weird sense. Anyways, an odd one, but the rest of the story very much matches. Which you see again, where was the line with the hussy part? Tame the scornful hussy as you will. And of course the yelling in the background. She walks away with a smile. Really, really strange, right? And this is how Dark Horse, I think, did fill the panels. They filled it with sort of things that were inferred in the Robert E. Howard story. So this is Conan drinking. Well, the day before everybody was gathered together for the big slaughter, he was drinking. And in here, he's the one that goes to the men and says, hey, we've been, summoned to appear without arms or armor. And of course, that's what leads to the slaughter. He is here, though, when he says, nope, nobody's moving unless it's on my order. Cut down the traitors, the whole battle occurs. And here you've got Valerius, who has run off to escape to meet with Ivga. He's getting the whole medical assistance that he needs. And Conan is taken alive. And that's the end of issue 1. Not a lot of content in issue 1. Issue 2, which is the Crucifixion one, is kind of strange, though. This is a weird one. I want to point this out right now. If you look at this art style, you will note this is materially different than what you're seeing here. Does it look different to anybody else? Well, it should, because it's totally different. Again, they did a crucifix kind of strangely. It doesn't match what Robert E. Howard was going for there. But the art style is very different. And it's interesting that of the entire story, this is the only chapter that has this different art style. I don't know why that is. Maybe they wanted to put emphasis on this because this is, again, what Robert E. Howard really put emphasis on in the story. I'm not sure. But it is an odd one that does stand out the way. I'm not going to go into too much detail on this because this exactly matches exactly the Robert E. Howard version. I can't say it anymore. Like, I've used exactly twice in the same sentence just to say this is it. The dialogue's the same, cutting down the crucible of pain, all of it is the same. And they made a whole chapter out of basically him being crucified and then riding off. This was an interesting chapter because this one was not there. Do you remember in the Robert E. Howard version how I mentioned that he already had 3,000 horsemen ready to go? Well, this is basically how we infer the horsemen come about through the letter that was from Astrius to Alcimedes in Numidium. And Conan actually gets it and starts reading it here. Now, you don't know this is Conan until the very end of the chapter. And this is where Conan makes the choice to betray the current hetman of the Kozakai. Because at the end of this, he makes sure that none of the band of people that are with him actually survive. And he actually gives encouragement to the escapees of Koran to say, hey guys, just make sure everybody else continues to come here. I'll make sure you're fed and provisioned. You're going to work for me when I take Koran. And he reveals himself at the very end of it to be Conan. Again, the story of the letter still matches. And there he is right there. He reveals himself to be Conan and says, this is why you guys are going to work for me. Okay, good enough. Again, a little bit of backfill. Obviously, they wanted to show why Conan and Olgerd were doing so well. Well, here you have them actually attacking a Turanian stronghold, which has a payroll in it. And they do win. And at this point in time, this is where you get the inference that other Kozakai are coming forward. This guy is the hetman of a different tribe. To actually follow, and he says right here, when he introduces Conan as his second, this guy who's come to follow him says, oh yeah, you're quote-unquote second. Got it. And then there's a note at the end here where he says, We are honored to be among the strong men by your side, looking directly at Conan. Clearly a reference here that this dialogue, which is the one that matches the Robert E. Howard story where Conan takes over, is coming, and that Conan has a reason for it. It gives you the background to it in a nice little story, and it makes it visual, which is nice. He again breaks his arm and tells him to ride off, and then gets everybody together and says, hey, I've got a story to tell you. Get together. All right, next chapter, you do have the actual mental anguish with the head being thrown at her. Obviously, Salome is having a good time torturing Tamaris. She goes outside and meets with this giant guy, but unlike the Marvel version, there is no discussion here of any of the soldiers having their way with Tamaris at all. And again, there's really no sense that any of other soldiers, other than this guy and Constantius, whatever, that guy know that Tamaris is actually still alive. Well, the head falls to this guy, and if you know who this is Valerius. He's well aware, and he talks to his people about what they're going to do and how they're going to rescue Tamaris, and the battle occurs. And again, here you've got all the siege weapons that this guy was convinced actually exist. Well, they don't exist. They're actually made out of paper mache, okay? They watch the battle from a distance. Conan does win the actual battle, as a just big surprise there, because he has his actual cross troop come in, and they attack from the side, which just wipes them all out. And at the end of the day, Salome learns about this through her crystal ball because she has a man on the ground, and he dies just after she communicates that Conan himself has killed this giant that she was talking to when she came out from torturing Tamaris mentally. Anyways, the story then goes back to, okay, well, we're doomed. I'm not going to make it, so let's just go make sure that Thog has a nice feast. Oh, by the way, this is a very nice Simon Bisley cover on this one. If anybody has a chance to go out there and grab themselves a copy of Conan the Avenger number 25, if you're a Simon Bisley fan, you're really going to be happy with this. This looks awesome. I know the glare probably doesn't make it look great, but it is a good one. Well, this follows through exactly. Valerius and his men are the ones who are rescuing Tamaris. And they come out to run into, unfortunately, a flashbang. This is where things get a little weird. It almost seems like Salome has summoned some sort of werewolf to kill them all and then take Tamaris. But that wasn't anywhere. It was really just, okay, it was a flashbang, and you get a sense that it was the priest that was with her that actually stabbed the other people. Anyways, Ivga arrives, and they have the conversation, go tell everybody else. I'm going to rescue her because I know she's trying to sacrifice her to the monster that she has in the temple. And guess what? Valerius is the one that does show up, kills this guy who was the priest guy who was slaughtered his men earlier in the dungeon, and then goes and stabs her in the back. That's the end of her. Like, he's the one that kills her, not Conan. And goes outside, and just like you expected, he says, no, here's your queen, and you know what's going to happen. Salome comes walking out, calls for Thog, drops dead, and just as Constantius' last men are about to fire, and they are firing, and these guys are going to run back in, Thog appears. Now, does anybody recognize this shape? Let me get this out of the way. Anybody recognize the shape of this monster? Anybody? All right, pause it here. If you got it, pause it, write down this timestamp in the video, and stick it in the comments. I recognize this. I know there's a reason why I recognize this. How many of you remember the end of Conan Destroyer? Conan the Destroyer. Which, I'm sorry, in my opinion, is still the better movie as compared to Conan the Barbarian. But I didn't say that out loud. Anywho, Conan comes riding in, and he tells his guys, just like it's in the Robert E. Howard story, he says, pepper that thing. And they do. Woof, there's a whole volley of arrows. Hits it once. Volley of arrows. Hits it again, and it drops dead. But that thing's huge. That's way bigger than the Robert E. Howard version of this thing. It came out of the door in the Robert E. Howard version. Anyways, she says, I'm going to take back over. Glad you're here, Conan. Why don't you become my counselor? He's like, no. You got Valerius sitting right over here. And Conan goes outside and crucifies Constantius again. Wrong shape of the cross. And then goes wandering off into the desert to lead his Kozukai. Interesting that the deviations this one had. But then again, this one had more page count in which it could stick those deviations. Like, Roy Thomas only had one issue of Savage Sword. They had 6 issues of a comic book to actually fill in the backstory on this one, from really a story that was just made up of a couple of vignettes. Interesting. All right, let's get to conclusion time.
All right, let's wrap this bad boy up. Now, I tell you, we went through Savage Sword of Conan number 5 there. We went through Conan the Avenger. I believe it was, issues 20 through 26? You know, it's weird. I can almost remember the years that Sophocles was alive, but clearly I have an issue remembering the issue numbers of the comic that we just read. Whew, old man brain. It's a beautiful thing. Anywho, we went through them. Now, here's the common theme that I notice here is that both of these had to do a fair amount of backfilling. And there's a reason for this. Robert E. Howard's story, and you heard this when I ran through it, it was very little Conan. And it's interesting. This is almost not even a Conan story. Conan is almost like a background character, a secondary character. This is almost like a dual character, main character type story, where you've got Valerius really being it. Valerius is the guy that's out there doing the spying and doing the working my way through the system for the last 7 months in the city. I'm the one rescuing Tamaris after I find out where she is. I'm the one that actually killed Salome. Conan, you did this wonderful thing in the background. But really, I'm the guy down the middle that actually got the job done. I'm the spearhead. It's interesting that that was what it was. And if you look at it that way, which is how I look at it, you kind of look at this story almost in a somewhat jaded manner. You're like, wow, is this really even a Conan story? No, forget I just said that. Anywho, which one of these is closer to Robert E. Howard is the point of this series, and that's what we're doing today. Well, let's see. Savage Sword of Conan number 5. What did we have in that? Well, we had a fair amount of backfill, but we also had some really weird deviation. All right. Now, Robert E. Howard did allude to in his story basically the fact that Tamaris was getting ravaged, at least at a bare minimum, by Constantius, whatever his name is. That guy, yeah. Anyways, that happened. But then when Marvel got their hands on it, when you had that scene at the end of the mental anguish torture point, where Salome really refers to the fact that just like you and the rest of your men will all have your turn, whoa, that's getting out there. And again, maybe you're trying to vilify Salome at this point in time and really vilify the mercenary army that's occupying Coran. But that one was out there. And another thing that I noticed in this one that was kind of odd, it threw me off, and I actually had to go through this thing page by page to try to figure it out. Why did they add this Markios character in there? It's Valerius was the name of the character. Why is it Markios now? That it seems strange to me that this Markios guy is now your main thing. He's it. He's the spearhead. It seems like a semantic point, but again, I don't understand what the rationale for that change was. The last thing in here that really threw it off for me in the Marvel version, and I think this was because Robert E. Howard wrote this basically where Conan was almost like a background character, had to do with the fact that Conan had to be the one leaving the battlefield, his own army in the middle of a battle, to go and rescue Tamaris in the dungeons. That to me just seemed like you were trying to put Conan on more pages. To me at that point in time, it just seemed like, okay, we're doing a page count exercise here. Markios has had too much opportunity here. Conan needs more page count. Let's write this in and change the story in that way. Did it actually make the story any better or worse? Well, I tell you, as a reader of a Conan story, to me it actually made it better. Because guess what? It has more Conan. Strange part about that, when I'm reading a Conan story, I want Conan content. I know, it's odd. But anyways, to me, personally, I liked it. But is that actually what Robert E. Howard wrote? No, it ain't. It ain't at all, actually. Now let's go to the Dark Horse version of this thing. Well, Dark Horse did have some interesting deviations. And Dark Horse's deviations were more context setting. When you looked at their deviations, you had, well, basically a whole book where the art style changed just for the crucifixion. Okay, I get that. Right? You're putting more of the narrative into the actual crucifixion, which I think was Robert E. Howard's main point when he wrote the story. But at the same time, you've got a whole background issue to basically explain why Conan has his 3,000 horsemen that come riding in at the end. How did that come to be? You could have just had that be the letter that went back to that guy in Nemedia, but you didn't. You actually had it be a story where he was interacting. There was, again, violence in it. He had to slaughter a couple of his own men. The deviation where he was raiding a Turanian stronghold to basically get a payroll. Well, again, you're trying to show what the Kosakai are doing. I get that. I get it. There's a reason why you're doing it. But again, it's context setting. But did it change any of the narrative? No. The narrative itself from Robert E. Howard, what he wrote, was exactly there. It is exactly what Robert E. Howard meant. So unfortunately in this one, when I do a conclusion and I say which one is the big one here, as much as I enjoy Savage Sword of Conan giant format in black and white and John Buscema work, I got to give this one to Dark Horse. They clearly took this home and they clearly knew this was what Robert E. Howard wanted. Let's wrap this bad boy up. Well, everybody, that is Battle Royale number 16 in the bag. There is one more to go. Only one. Battle Royale number 17, which will be coming up in the coming weeks. But I will tell you this. For the next couple of weeks, we are taking a pause on some Robert E. Howard content. I don't know how many of my Canadian followers are out there that are going to back me up on this and be aware of this one, but we got 2 weekends coming up that are fairly major as far as the CFL goes. If you know, you know. So I'm going to be stepping back a bit. I'm going to be putting my attention somewhere else for the next couple of weeks. But when we come back to this, we'll be doing the final Robert E. Howard Battle Royale, which is actually going to be the one that I've been the most terrified of all this time. Everybody, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed the chapters and the fact that you could jump through it. We'll see you in the next video in a few weeks.